They were fought in the silent, lonely spaces of the human heart, against the unending siege of what it means to be good in a world that is not. Their names are lost to the wind, but the echo of their struggle to find a flicker of goodness in the oppressive dark is the sound we still mistake for our own heartbeat. This is Sleepy History, where we listen for the heartbeats history books have forgotten. We will feel the bite of the wind, the gnawing of hunger, and the strange, desperate hope that bloomed like a weed in the cracks of a brutal world. We will learn that their superstitions were not foolishness, but a shield against a world they could not control. Their faith was not simple, but a desperate bargain with a silent God. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. We see how the anxieties that keep us awake at night, about our health, our security, our purpose, are echoes of their much rawer, more immediate fears. We see how our modern world is built directly on the foundation of their forgotten labor, their anonymous suffering, and their quiet endurance. They cleared the forests that became our cities. They drained the swamps that became our farmland. And they carried the cultural DNA that, for better or worse, became our own. And what remains of them in us? More than we think. And now, the village is a hollowed-out thing, a place of women, old men, and children waiting. History remembers the glorious charge, the clash of steel, the names of the victors. It forgets the long, quiet shadow that war casts over the lives of ordinary people. For the 99%, war was not an adventure. It was a plague. It was the trampling of your crops by a foraging army. It didn't matter whose army. As a hungry soldier is a hungry soldier. It was the requisitioning of your grain, your ox, your sons. The smell of mud and manure is replaced by the stench of tanneries, the smoke of forges, and the cloying scent of spices from a merchant's stall. The sounds are a cacophony, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the cry of a street vendor, the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestone. This is the town, a different kind of ecosystem. It is not governed by the seasons, but by the flow of coin and the strict rules of the guilds. Here, a man is not what he harvests, but what he makes. Ask yourself, how do you love a child in a world where death is a constant, hungry presence at the door? Do you hold back a piece of your heart as a defense against the inevitable grief? Or do you love with a fierce, desperate intensity, knowing your time might be measured in days? For these women, every birth was both a miracle and a gamble, paid for in blood and fear. Section 5. The Unseen Child. A boy of 7, his face smudged with dirt, chases a piglet through the muddy track of the village. It was the peasant planting a nitrogen-fixing legume, not because he knew the science, but because his grandfather taught him it kept the hunger away. It was the woman using a moldy bread poultice on a wound, a desperate act of folk medicine that sometimes, miraculously, worked. We gain something profound when we look past the stone castles and study these vanished people. We see that they were not simple or brutish. They were complex, pragmatic, and bound by webs of belief and obligation we can barely imagine. Your name would be on the lists of the lords and ladies who watch from the canopied stands, mistaking brutal efficiency for skill. The temptation is a serpent coiling in your gut. In a world where your standing, your wealth, your very survival can be decided by a single moment of overwhelming force, this is the logical choice. It is the choice of the wolf on his shield. Instead, you hold your line. You ignore the screaming. practical voice in your head and aim squarely for the center of his shield. For the heart, the peasant's prayer was not for your glory in the lists. It was that your horse, in its glorious charge, would not trample the thin strip of land where their family's turnips grew. Their concern was not your honor, but the weight of your taxman's hand come harvest time. The chivalric code is a language they do not speak. They speak the language of hunger, of damp winters, of the bell that tolls for a child lost to fever. It's a stark reminder that our heroes are always, without exception, defined by who is telling the story. You can still smell the greasy smoke of burning wool and thatch, a smell that clings to the memory like a shroud. You saw the same men who now polish their helms for a game, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of 100 burning homes. They called it enforcing the Duke's justice. The weavers called it the end of the world. Protect the weak, defend the helpless, show mercy. These were the vows sworn on holy relics, whispered in candlelit chapels, just like the one you now pass. The steel is cold, but the weight of it is a familiar comfort. The goal is to score a point, Leo, not to crush a skull. You let the words settle in the space between you. A broken lance is honor. A broken man is a regret. He looks confused, his brow furrowed. It's as if you've just told him the sun rises in the west. This isn't in the stories. The songs don't speak of points or restraint. They speak of victory, total and absolute. We tell ourselves bedtime stories about shining nights to forget the darkness they were created to fight, and the deeper darkness they carried within them as a consequence. We need the myth of the righteous sword to sleep at night, to believe that violence can be clean, just, and contained. But it never is. The greatest battles of history were not fought for territory or for treasure. They were not fought with siege engines and longbows. The floor is cold enough to steal your prayers. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This isn't a story of kings in gilded halls or knights whose deeds are sung by minstrels. This is a journey into the marrow of that forgotten time. We are here for the lives lived in the shadows of the cathedrals, the quiet prayers whispered over a sick child, the taste of fear in the back of the throat when the harvest fails. They lived in a world they could not control, at the mercy of seasons, sickness, and superstition. Their survival was not guaranteed by knowledge or technology, but by a tough, desperate, and deeply ingrained web of community, ritual, and faith. They held on, not because they could see a better future, but because holding on was the only thing to do. Their existence was a testament to the simple, grinding, essential act of keeping things going. When we study these ordinary, vanished people, we gain more than facts about the past. We gain a measure of humility. SSS, Section 13, The Long Shadow of the Sword. The men are gone. One morning, the Lord's Reeve came with a summons. The King of England has a quarrel with the King of France, a dispute over a piece of land 100 leagues away that you cannot even imagine. And so the men, your husband, your sons, your neighbors, have gone to fight. They are not knights, they are farmers, levied as foot soldiers or archers. They left with promises of pay they may never see, for a cause they do not understand. The woman who preferred her own company, who knew too much about herbs, who did not attend church regularly, She was planting the seeds of her own ruin in the fertile ground of village gossip. Ask yourself, could you live under the constant gaze of your neighbors, your every action judged and catalogued? Or would the weight of their collective stare press you into a shape not of your own choosing, simply for the peace of being left alone? Question mark. The stone and the guild. You pass through the town gate, and the world changes. These were not seen as contradictory to faith, but as necessary, practical additions. God was a distant king. The midwife's charm was a tool for the bloody work at hand. It reveals a dual-track worldview, one for the soul and another, more desperate one for the body. This created a brutal emotional calculus. A mother, lighting a candle for a stillborn daughter, did so not because it changed the past, but because it calmed the whispers of a soul lost in shadow. This is where their history and ours was truly made, not in the moment of impact, but in the quiet aftermath, in the choices that no one records. If we learn anything from walking in their shoes, it is this: survival in the Middle Ages was not always a grand, heroic struggle. More often, it was a quiet, grinding negotiation. A negotiation with the soil, with the seasons, with God, and most of all, with each other. It was the wisdom to know which battles to fight and which to lose. And in that tiny motion, a gift is given. An opening, a clear, dishonorable shot at the vulnerable crescent of his unarmored armpit, the gap where the steel of his rear brace meets his cuirass. It's a butcher's blow, not a knight's. The kind of strike that shatters a collarbone, severs the cords of the shoulder, and sends a man not just from the tournament, but from any future where his arm is his own. It would be a career-ending, potentially fatal wound, and it would make you the victor. The crowd would roar. The purse of gold would be yours. They are watching a spectacle. Yes, but they are watching the man who controls their world with a stillness born of absolute necessity. They are watching the wolf that guards the sheep, and they know, with an ancient and bone-deep wisdom, that the wolf must always be fed. This was the unbridgeable gap, the chasm that defined the feudal world. The knight was sworn in the eyes of God to protect the peasant, but they lived in entirely different realities, separated by a wall of iron, wealth, and experience. The patron, a great duke whose lands you now cross, has sent riders ahead with his proclamation. This grand melee, he declared, is to be held to honor God and the fellowship of chivalry. The words echo in your mind, and a dry, humorless laugh almost escapes you. Fellowship. You remember that word. You remember that fellowship. It was only last autumn you saw them in their full glory, not on a field of honor, but in a town of weavers. The town was a week late with their tax tribute. A week. A clean strike to the helm, my lord? Leo asks. His voice, still cracking on the edges of manhood, is brimming with a vicarious bloodlust. He sees the glory, but not the grit. He imagines the sound of splintering ashwood and the ringing blow that fells an opponent in a single heroic pass. He has been raised on a diet of songs, of Roland and Charlemagne, tales where knights are like saints with swords, and every battle is a righteous judgment. You pause, your gauntleted hand coming to rest on his thin shoulder. We still send our young people to do violent things in the name of noble causes, promising them honor while handing them weapons that can erase a life from a continent away. We still create heroes out of those who wield force, often ignoring the quiet stewards, the healers, the builders, the teachers, who simply keep the world turning. We are still utterly fascinated by the idea of the good warrior, the person who can contain immense power within a fragile moral code. Because we are terrified of what that power looks like when it is unleashed, when the code breaks. Section 1. Introduction. The first sound you know is not a bell, but the wet, rasping cough from the small bundle of wool beside you. It's a sound that clings to the dark, a tiny chisel chipping away at the fragile piece of the pre-dawn cold. Outside, the world is still a ghost, wrapped in a shroud of mist that the old women say is the breath of sleeping giants. You rise, your bones an almanac of every winter you have survived, and move toward the dead embers in the hearth. It was simply the final, most important step. Section 17. Wind down, reflective close. The bell tolls one last time, and the figures fade back into the mist of history. The knight on his battlements, the mother in childbirth, the farmer in his field. They recede, their faces becoming indistinct, their voices lost to the wind. We leave them there, in their world of mud and prayer, of grit and grace. The timeless takeaway from these lives is one of profound resilience in the face of absolute uncertainty. By creating a visible, reviled them, it reinforced the identity and unity of us. It channeled anxieties and fears onto a designated target, cleansing the community through persecution. Ask yourself, what is the cost of belonging? Is the comfort of being on the inside worth the price of another's exclusion? The bell of the leper was a sound that defined the boundaries of their world, a sad, repetitive note that drew the line between the saved and the damned, the clean and the unclean, the human and the outcast. This is why public shaming was such a common punishment. A baker who sold underweight loaves might be paraded through the village with the bad bread hung around his neck. The humiliation was the point. It was a way of surgically removing the rot of a bad reputation from the body of the community. This system of whispers and public judgment created a powerful pressure to conform. Individuality was not celebrated. It was suspect. To be different was to be dangerous. A third of all children would not see their first birthday. The church taught that an unbaptized baby who died was lost to limbo, a sorrowful, gray eternity. This belief created a frantic urgency around birth, a race against mortality. The surprising insight lies in the collision of folk magic and Christian faith. While the priest was on standby for a swift baptism, the midwife was practicing a much older magic. She might hold a key in the laboring woman's hand, hoping to unlock the womb. She might chant secret words passed down through generations. Your path is not the glorious one, but it is the one that might just let you sleep at night, listening to the rain instead of the ghosts of other men's sons. Section 17. Wind down, reflective close. The tournament field is empty now. The bright banners are furled. The mud is hardening in the cool evening air, and the only sound is the wind whistling through the empty stands. The cheers and the judgments have faded, leaving behind only the consequences. The world narrows to a single, terrifying point of focus: the approaching tip of your opponent's lance and the garish, snarling wolf painted on his shield. He is Sir Renaud, a man whose reputation for brutality in the border skirmishes is whispered about in taverns and celebrated in halls. They say he burns harvests for sport. They say his mercy has the lifespan of a winter fly. Today, he plays the gallant knight. You see the subtle shift in his weight, the almost imperceptible cant of his saddle as he adjusts for the impact. It is the gaze of a farmer judging the sky for rain, of a butcher appraising livestock. It is a look of profound and quiet calculation. In their eyes, you are not a hero from a troubadour's song. You are a season. You are the hailstorm that can ruin the barley, the spring sun that lets it grow, the sudden flood that washes away the hut. You are their landlord, their judge, and their protector, but you are also, and perhaps most importantly, their greatest potential danger. The dust from the road cakes your throat, each breath a dry rasp. Your horse plods on, its rhythm the only clock you have. To your right, a small wooden chapel sits huddled against the tree line, its cross a dark splinter against the pale sky. It looks lonely, a saint forgotten by the roadside. You make the sign of the cross without thinking, a habit worn smooth as a river stone. You are riding toward the tournament, where the banners will snap like summer thunder and the wine will flow red as a fresh wound. Chapter 3. A lesson for the eager. The air in the pavilion is thick with the smells of horse, oiled leather, and anxious sweat. Outside, the roar of the crowd is a distant sea, a wave of noise that has not yet crested. Your squire, Leo, holds your shield. It feels impossibly heavy, a slab of painted oak and boiled hide, but he holds it steady. His knuckles are white. On its face, your device, a stooping falcon, wings half furled, frozen in the moment before the strike. The artist caught its hunger perfectly. His greatest battle is not on the tournament field, against another man in shining steel. It is here, in the suffocating dark of a moonless night, against the ghosts of his own making. The faces of men you struck down, the sound of a prayer cut short by the fall of your sword, they are your constant, silent companions. Have we truly evolved past this? Or have we just designed more sophisticated armor? It remains in our own deep-seated need for ritual to calm our anxieties, in the stories we tell our children to make the dark less frightening. Every time we sacrifice a piece of our true selves for the sake of safety or acceptance, we are echoing their impossible choice. They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted in a hostile field, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted. Their lives were not a grand tapestry, but a million forgotten threads woven together to create the cloth we now wear. They feared the pain of dying, but they did not fear the state of being dead in the way we do. For the faithful, death was a release from the suffering of the world and a doorway to paradise. This is why they could face plague, famine, and war with a kind of fatalistic resilience that seems almost superhuman to us. Was it faith that saved them, or fear of what came after? Perhaps they are the same thing. Their lives were a long, hard journey, and death was not the end of the road. The leper showed the consequences of sin. The heretic, burned at the stake, was a terrifying warning against questioning the authority of the church. Jewish communities, often forbidden from owning land or joining guilds, were forced into roles like moneylending, a practice forbidden to Christians. This made them both essential to the economy and vulnerable to attack, becoming convenient scapegoats for any societal ill, from plague to famine. They were the other, the dark mirror in which the community saw its own righteousness reflected. This system of exclusion was not random. It was a form of social engineering. Gossip was not idle chatter. It was the primary form of social regulation, a constant, low-level court of public opinion that kept people in line far more effectively than the Lord's bailiff. The surprising insight here is the power of reputation. In a world with no formal records, your name, your reputation, was your most valuable asset. It determined who would help you during the harvest, who would lend you a cup of flour, and who would speak for you when you were accused of a crime. To be labeled a liar or a thief was a social death sentence. They have untied every knot in the house, on sacks, on clothing, on ropes, believing that a physical knot can create a spiritual one, holding the baby in the womb. For a medieval woman, motherhood was the most sacred and most dangerous calling. Her entire value, to her husband, her family, her village, was measured by her fertility. Yet every pregnancy was a walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Childbed fever, the mysterious milk leg, hemorrhaging, these were the plagues of women, and they carried away 1 in 3 before their time. The infant's journey was even more perilous. Navigating this social landscape is a battle of its own, fought with whispers instead of swords. Every choice has consequences for the story people tell about you, your personal brand in a world where your name is all you truly own. Being a man of peace in a world that worships warriors is a dangerous occupation. It requires a courage that leaves no scars, earns no songs, and is almost always mistaken for its opposite. Ask yourself, in a world that rewards the lion, what is the value of the shepherd? This is the tournament field, the holiest of chapels for men who speak the language of steel. It is a performance of war, a pageant where death is meant to be a guest, not the host. But the line between the two is as thin as a spider's thread, and everyone here knows it. Your heart beats a frantic peasant's rhythm against the cage of your ribs, a wild drum at odds with the noble pageant. You charge. They see the story they wish to see. Valor, glory, a beautiful violent ballet for their afternoon's diversion. They cheer for the symbol, but you pass the roped-off section for the common folk, and the air changes. The sound is absorbed. Here there are no bright silks, only the dun and russet of the earth they work. These are your people, the tenants of your fields, the smiths who shoe your horses, the women who spin the wool from your sheep. They do not cheer. They do not jeer. They simply watch. Their gaze is not one of awe. But beneath the iron was just a man, trying to forget the things he had to do to survive. A man who wakes in a sweat not from a nightmare, but from a memory. History isn't just a record of what happened, it's a ghost story of what was endured. And as you arrive at the tournament, forcing a smile for the Duke, you have to ask yourself, what is the greater performance? The staged combat to come, or the lie that you are still whole? Your armor isn't just for protection, it's a declaration of economic power, a promise of violence for hire. So you ask yourself, as your squire tightens the final strap on your helm, narrowing the world to a single terrifying slit of light, is the monster you're paid to fight the one across the field, or the one you create in the market by simply needing him to exist? Not's the glorious charge sung by minstrels in the great hall. Not's the tapestries woven with golden thread depicting your victory. The truth is the quiet, nightly struggle to reconcile the man you are with the thing you must pretend to be. The knight who offers his water skin to a thirsty peasant, who smiles at children in the market, who hates the very war he is celebrated for waging. He is not a paradox. He is the inevitable product of a world that demands violence while whispering of peace through a priest's sermon. Their faith was not a simple comfort, but a shield against the paralyzing fear of death, disease, and the eternal darkness they believed lay just beyond the veil. To study them is to study the raw, unaccredited architects of the modern mind. And what remains of them? It is not in the crumbling keeps or the dusty museum artifacts. Their legacy is quieter, more intimate. It remains in the ghost weight of the expectations we wear every day, the professional armor of a uniform or a title, the social armor of a curated online life. The real world, the permanent one, was what came after. This belief wasn't just a comfort. It was the central organizing principle of their existence. It shaped their laws, their art, their every action. The Last Judgment, vividly carved and painted in every church, was not a metaphor. It was a future event, as real and certain as the sunrise. Every moment of their lives was lived in the knowledge that they would one day stand before God and account for it. This shaped a unique relationship with mortality. The leper, the heretic, the Jew, they lived on the margins, their existence a constant reminder of the fragility of the social and spiritual order. The leper was perhaps the most visceral example. Leprosy was seen not just as a disease, but as a punishment for sin, often the sin of lust. A special church service, the Separatio Leprosorum, was held to officially declare the leper dead to the world, a ceremony chillingly similar to a funeral mass. The surprising and deeply melancholic insight is how society needed these outsiders. They were a living sermon. This is about the delicate web of relationships that holds the village together. This is local justice, swift, personal, and utterly public. The village was the essential unit of medieval life, a tiny, inward-looking world. Most people were born, lived, and died within a 5-mile radius of their home. This created a society of intense intimacy and suffocating scrutiny. Everyone knew everyone else's business. They knew who was a good worker, who was a drunk, who was pious, and who was rumored to meet the devil at the crossroads. It is a sound older than any language, a raw, primal tearing of the veil between life and death. Her name is Eleanor, and she is giving birth to her 5th child. The other women of the village are with her, their faces grim and knowing. They have barred the door and stuffed rags in the keyhole, not for privacy, but to keep demons from being drawn to the scent of blood and pain. He knows the cost of a prize-winning stallion, the weeks of recovery from a shattered collarbone, the political ripple of embarrassing a nobleman's favored son over a pointless game. He knows the difference between a fool's courage and a wise man's restraint. You are no longer the most feared man on the field. The minstrels will not be adding verses to your song tonight, but something else has settled in its place. Trust. Among the men who truly matter, the ones who command armies, not just tourney lances, your stock has risen. You have shown you can think beyond the next charge. The world is a slit of light and noise, a narrow rectangle of bleached sky and roaring faces framed by the steel of your helm. The air is thick with the scent of trampled grass, horse sweat, and the cloying sweetness of wine spilled on the dusty ground. Every breath you take is a labor, pulling stale air past the damp linen padding pressed against your mouth. The weight of your armor is a familiar god, a crushing presence that promises both salvation and suffocation. The steel shell of your own making groans as you guide the destrier through the parting crowd. Pennants snap in the wind, a riot of color, against a sky the color of slate. You are a moving constellation of polished iron and sworn oaths, a figure stepped from a tapestry. To your right, the noble stands burst with noise, the flash of jewels, the bright peacock laughter of ladies, the boisterous, wine-fueled shouts of men who wager on blood as easily as they breathe. Long before any scholar had a word for the wound that doesn't bleed, soldiers carried the battlefield home inside them. They didn't see it as a sickness of the mind, but as a spiritual stain, a haunting that clings to them like the scent of death on a shroud. You can confess to a priest, you can say your penance and light 100 candles, but how do you exorcise a ghost that lives behind your own eyes? We look back and see stoic warriors, figures of iron will and unbending courage. The immense cost of the tools of the trade created a permanent warrior class, men whose entire economic existence depended on the justification of their skills. Peace, for a man like you, is a slow famine. It means rusting armor and a destrier eating through your savings. It could mean bankruptcy. It is a chilling thought, one that visits you in the quiet hours before the trumpets sound, that the systems we build to protect us can develop a vested interest in the existence of threat. The phantom weight of the helm still presses on your brow long after you've taken it off. The memory of the melee, a blur of splintered lances and the panicked eyes of a horse, flashes behind your eyelids. You feel again the burden of judgment, the weight of a lord's command that felt less like an order and more like a sin you were paid to commit. This is the conflict that festers between your duty and your soul, a slow-acting poison for which there is no known cure. This is the truth of your life. We forget the fragile, fleeting human heart that beat within. We gain a profound and unsettling empathy when we study these vanished people, not as historical figures, but as ourselves in another time. We realize their superstitions were not born of ignorance, but of a desperate need to impose order on a universe that was random and cruel. Their rigid social classes were not just systems of oppression, but cages built to protect them from the chaos of a world without safety nets. The entire family, and often the neighbors, would gather to witness the passing. This was not morbid curiosity, it was a communal duty. They were there to pray for the departing soul, to offer comfort, and to serve as witnesses that the death had been a good one. A good death was one of faith and repentance. A bad death, sudden, violent, without a priest, was a terrifying prospect, believed to leave the soul vulnerable and wandering. The most profound insight into the medieval mind is found here, in their obsession with the afterlife. The physical world was a temporary, sorrowful pilgrimage. People melt away, pressing themselves against walls, pulling their children close. A figure emerges, shrouded in a gray cloak, his face half hidden. He is a leper, and he is a dead man walking. He is not just sick, he is ritually unclean, a physical manifestation of God's displeasure. He must live outside the community, his only connection to it the alms of those who are both repulsed and frightened by him. Every society defines itself by whom it casts out. In the Middle Ages, the outsider was a figure of profound fear and fascination. Okay, officially recompenses assigned to all parties. They face needing to listen. In the end, because of the case, the village was to be defended. Eventually, the big bad will not be backing off to listen to both sides. The entire village watches. This is not just about a cow and some cabbages. It's a moment of historical irony. The very institution that described the disease of sin in such terrifying detail also held the exclusive and expensive patent on the cure. Was it faith that filled the pews and the collection plates? Or was it a perfectly calibrated system of terror, a masterclass in marketing the afterlife? The line between devotion and desperation was as thin as a whisper in a cold confessional. Section 4. The blood price of birth. In the corner of the hut, a woman is screaming. It was a shield forged in the heat of real battle, not these festival games. But here, in this theater of peace, the rules are different. Here, perception is the sharpest blade. Then, a heavy hand claps your shoulder. It is Baron Valerius, a man whose face is a roadmap of old scars. His eyes, nested in wrinkles, hold no pity, only a deep, quiet understanding. A good break, Kalen, a clean break. He says nothing more, but he doesn't need to. He saw. Every pass is a roll of the dice with another man's life and your own. The trumpet sounds, a sharp, golden crack in the air. You spur your horse. Here, in this thunderous charge, a moment stretched between two heartbeats. Ask yourself, is this courage you're feeling, or just the performance of it? When a man's life becomes a spectacle for the crowd, has he mastered his fear, or merely sold it for their applause? It is a framework for guilt, a hope for redemption, and a way to speak one's deepest fears into the silence of a steel helm. We may have replaced the confessional with the therapy couch, the Hail Mary with the self-help mantra, but the human need to unburden the soul to a higher, unseen power has not changed at all. Ask yourself, in a life defined by the sword, was God a shield against damnation, or was he simply the only one you could tell the truth to? The memory isn't a story you tell. It is a physical weight in your gut, a cold spot in your heart that no fire can warm. And you remember the sound an axe makes when it finds the gap between a helmet and a gorget. It is not the clean clang of the practice yard. It is a wet, gristly, final sound. A sound of sinew parting and bone yielding. It is the sound of a life being unplugged from the world. This is the trauma that the chronicles will call experience. It tells the wealthy patrons watching from the stands, the dukes and barons who fund wars, that your brand is reliable, effective, and worth the investment. A fumbled charge, a fall from the saddle, is a disastrous marketing failure, a signal of poor stock. This is the truth glossed over by the minstrel songs, the quiet accounting that happens after the cheering stops. A knight's power wasn't just in his sword arm, but in his balance sheet. Section 17. The Unseen Battle. You lie in bed, the stone walls of your room cold around you. The rushes on the floor hold the day's dust and the faint scent of stale wine. Sleep does not come easily. It is a shy bird, frightened away by the slightest noise. The day's aches are a dull chorus in your body. The strained shoulder from the practice yard, the raw chafe of mail against your neck. But it is the unseen bruises that throb the most. It is the lie that keeps you alive. The candle burns low, its light a fading memory. The armor lies dismantled on the floor, a scattered constellation of steel and leather. It looks smaller now, less like the shell of a giant and more like the discarded tools of a trade. This is the quiet truth at the heart of their age and of ours. We look back and see the stone, the steel, the symbols of power that have survived the centuries. We see the cathedral spires and the castle walls, and we mistake the container for the contents. This is the moment everything has been leading to. Not the harvest, not marriage, not childbirth, but this, the ars moriendi, the art of dying well. Her whole life has been a preparation for this final examination. She must confess her sins, accept her fate with piety, and fix her eyes and soul on Christ, shutting out the demons that were believed to gather at the deathbed, eager to snatch a wavering soul at the last second. Death was not a private, sterile event. It was a public, ritualized performance. Their world was not a simple choice between God and the devil, but a constant negotiation with a host of powers, great and small, seen and unseen. It was a faith born of pragmatism, a spiritual tapestry woven from threads of doctrine, fear, and ancient memory. Section 12. The Bell and the Leper. You hear it before you see him, the hollow clack of a wooden clapper, or the sad, flat toll of a small bell. The sound is a warning, an announcement of contagion and sin made flesh. The image of a feasting hall, with tables groaning under the weight of roasted swans and boars, was not just a display of power. It was a vision of paradise on earth. It was the absolute opposite of the daily reality for 99% of the population. Ask yourself, what lines would you cross for a loaf of bread? If your child was crying from hunger, would the fear of God or the Lord's justice stop you from stealing? In the Middle Ages, this was not a philosophical question. It was a Tuesday, a saint's relic. A finger bone, a scrap of cloth, was not a memento, but a spiritual shield, its holy power radiating outwards to protect its keeper. This gave the Church an unbreakable monopoly, not just on salvation, but on safety. To be excommunicated was not just a spiritual crisis, it was to be stripped of your armor and cast out into a world of monsters, both seen and unseen. This field also fueled a dark economy. Pardoners sold slips of paper forgiving sins, a kind of spiritual insurance against an eternity in the skillfully depicted hellfire on the church wall. Their eyes, once filled with a cautious respect, now hold a flicker of contempt. Lost his nerve, one mutters, just loud enough to be heard. The old wolf's teeth are dull. They see you as a relic, a stone worn smooth by a river they are only just beginning to navigate. To them, glory is the only currency. Restraint is a peasant's virtue. Your reputation, a thing you have spent 20 years building with sweat, blood, and sleepless nights, feels like it is dissolving in the afternoon drizzle. They don't know that the Church has condemned this very tournament as an act of pride, a mortal sin, an irony lost on the cheering masses. They want a hero or a villain, a victory or a defeat. They want the story. You lower your visor, the world vanishes, replaced by a single focused line of sight. You couch the lance, settling its weight into the lance rest on your breastplate. You can feel the nervous energy of your destrier, a living engine of muscle and bone, trembling beneath you. The snarling wolf across the field becomes your entire universe. Their faces flash behind your eyes, unbidden, like ghosts lit by lightning. They are the true audience for this prayer, the silent witnesses to the man you were and the man you are pretending to be today. This is the currency of faith in your time. It is not just a Sunday observance, a rote recitation in a cold church. It is an active, daily tool for navigating a brutal and inexplicable world. For the night, it is the only anvil upon which the soul can be reshaped after being dented by violence. You remember the press of bodies, the horrifying, suffocating intimacy of the melee. It is not a graceful dance of swords, but a shoving match with sharpened iron. You feel the weight of a dying man slumping against your shield, his last hot breath misting on your visor. You see again the eyes of the boy you had to kill, wide with a disbelief that you shared, inches from your own. He was someone's son, and you were the harvest reaper. This animal, your blunted tournament lance, your polished sword, your squire's keep. Knighthood is not a calling bestowed by God. It is a business, a violent, precarious family business. You are its CEO, and your product is force. Today's tournament is a trade show. The bright banners of the assembled lords are not crests of honor. They are corporate logos. The field is not a stage for glory. It is a showroom floor. Here, you display your brand of controlled lethality. A clean pass, a shattered lance against an opponent's shield. That is not a victory. It is a successful product demonstration. It's in the simple, defiant act of telling a better story, hoping it will take root. They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted. It is your name, your legacy, your right to exist above others. It is a terrible burden that you cannot set down. Not really. Even now, with it lying in a heap on the floor, its ghost weight presses on your soul. Leo begins to clean the pieces, his movements methodical. He knows that tomorrow, the ritual will begin again in reverse. The man will be put away, and the knight will be reassembled, piece by painful piece. Because in this world, vulnerability is a death sentence. The armor must be worn, not for the joust, but for survival. It was a frantic final attempt to balance the books of a lifetime, to use earthly wealth to purchase a heavenly reward. Ask yourself, when the light begins to fade, what becomes most important? The memory of the life you lived, or the hope and fear of what is to come? For the medieval old, it was a time when the veil between this world and the next grew terrifyingly thin. Section 16, The Final Journey. The priest leans close, his voice a low murmur in the quiet, smoky room. He holds a crucifix to the dying woman's lips. They saw no contradiction in making the sign of the cross and then spitting to ward off the evil eye. One was for the soul, the other for luck. This belief system was a direct consequence of a world filled with uncertainty. When your survival depends on unpredictable forces, the weather, disease, the whims of a lord, you hedge your bets. You use every tool at your disposal. Was it faith that saved them? Or was it fear of what came after? The answer is likely both. It was a sin only the rich had the luxury of committing. For the poor, hunger was a constant companion, a physical manifestation of their place in God's and the Lord's order. It was a tool of control. A well-fed peasant might have ideas. A hungry one thinks only of his next meal. This reality created a deep psychological connection between food and security. To have a full larder was the ultimate form of wealth. The fog that rolled in from the marshes wasn't just water vapor. It was the devil's breath, a shroud where lost souls and malevolent spirits dwelled. This is why you make the sign of the cross when you yawn, not out of piety, but to prevent a demon from flying into your open mouth and taking up residence in your soul. The surprising insight is how this fear structured society itself. The church provided the only reliable defense. Holy water was not symbolic. It was a spiritual weapon, a splash of it capable of warding off a lurking imp. You release your grip on the saddle, allowing your weight to carry you over, a controlled fall that looks, to the untrained eye, like a catastrophic failure. You hit the mud with a soft thud, the cold seeping instantly through your gambeson. The roar of the crowd shifts from anticipation to a mix of groans and derisive cheers. You have lost, deliberately. Later, as you strip off your dented helm, the air is thick with judgment. It's a sickness, more potent than any plague. Young knights, their faces flushed with wine and vicarious victory, strut past you. The game is over. The harvest of steel has claimed a soul. This speaks to something deep in the human spirit, a need that time has not dulled, the need to witness and celebrate the very skills we fear the most. We package existential danger as entertainment, placing it at a safe distance so we can admire the courage without feeling the terror. The crowd sees two shining figures, symbols of an ideal. They do not see the man inside, whose bowels are liquid with fear, whose family's future rests on the outcome of this violent collision. You pray that his horse doesn't stumble on the churned earth, that his squire fastened his armor correctly, that your lance strikes true and harmlessly on the high crest of his shield, shattering in a shower of splendid, meaningless splinters. A good, clean break, a thrilling spectacle for the ladies in the stands, a contest of skill, not a reaping. Because you also pray for forgiveness. Forgiveness for the men you did not show such mercy to. The men in a muddy field in Flanders, their shields not meant for sport, their screams not for a crowd. It is not the sound of a procession, but the thunder of a charge. In a blink, the bright summer day vanishes. The neat field ahead dissolves into a mire of churned mud and blood, littered with fallen banners and the twitching bodies of men and horses. The adoring cheers of the crowd are swallowed by a single unending wall of screaming, a sound of pure animal terror that has no melody, no cadence, only a raw edge that saws at the soul. This is the echo you cannot escape. You arrive at the stables. He is waiting. Your destrier, your warhorse, is not a friend. He is an asset, a living siege engine, a mountain of muscle and nervous energy worth a lifetime of a peasant's labor. His hide shines not with loving care, but with the meticulous maintenance of a priceless tool. His breath steams in the cool air, and the look in his eye is one of wild, barely contained power. He is the centerpiece of your enterprise. We are the harvest of seeds they planted in frozen ground, hoping for a spring they would never see. The rituals may have changed, the superstitions may have faded, but the human heart at the center of it all beats with the same rhythm. What remains of them is not in the stone of their castles, but in the invisible architecture of our lives. It's in the lullaby a mother hums, without knowing its ancient origin. It's in the instinct to protect our family from a world we don't fully understand. You are no longer an icon of war, a moving statue of God's favor and a king's might. You are just a man, aching and exposed, his sweat cooling on his skin. You are vulnerable. You are yourself. Ask yourself, is the man the one who wears the armor, or the one who is left when it is taken away? For so many in this age, identity is not chosen. It is assigned, worn like a uniform. The peasant is his field. The priest is his cloth. The Lord is his sword. This armor you wear is more than protection. The old man by the fire holds the story of his entire world within him, but his failing memory is like a book whose pages are slowly turning to dust. He is becoming a ghost before he has even died. For the wealthy, old age offered a different kind of challenge: the spiritual reckoning. With death approaching, the focus shifted entirely to the fate of the soul. They endowed chapels, paid for monks to say perpetual prayers for them, and gave lavishly to the church. The surprising insight is that this wasn't seen as heresy by most common folk. It was simply how the world worked. The universe was thick with forces, both holy and unholy, and one had to navigate them with all available knowledge. The church held the keys to the next life, but the wise woman held the cure for warts. The priest could save your soul, but a charm could find a lost object. This created a complex spiritual landscape, a blend of Christian doctrine and deep-rooted folk wisdom. The flavors were strong and simple: salt, if you could get it, and herbs from the garden. The sweetness of a honeyed cake was a pleasure so intense it was close to a religious experience. The surprising insight is how hunger shaped morality and society. When the harvest failed, the carefully constructed rules of community began to fray. A neighbor you had known your whole life might steal your last chicken. The sin of gluttony, so condemned by the church, seems a bitter irony in a world where most people lived on the edge of starvation. It is a portrait of the demon that waits for you in the woods, in the dark, in a moment of weakness. The church is not just a house of God. It is a fortress against a world teeming with invisible enemies. Their world was built on an architecture of fear. Every belief, every ritual, was a buttress against the terrifying unknown. Demons, they believed, were a physical reality. They could sour the milk, lame a horse, slip into your dreams to torment you with doubt or lust. But you also see the boy's horse, a fine bay, its eyes wide with panic. You see the Lord who owns that horse, his face tight with a landowner's anxiety. And you see the boy himself, no older than your own son, his jaw set with the brittle confidence of youth. Breaking him would be easy. It would be a harvest of cheers. So you do the unthinkable. You let your own lance dip. You absorb the impact with a practiced grunt, turning the blow from a piercing strike into a clumsy, shattering shove. The tournament was a way to sublimate the warrior instinct, to take the bloody business of war and wrap it in the silken ribbons of pageantry. A place for knights to prove their mettle, win a fortune in ransom, or catch the eye of a wealthy patron or a high-born lady. But the line between sport and slaughter was perilously thin as a sword's edge. A horse stumbles, the strap breaks, a man's aim is off by a hand's breadth, and suddenly the cheering crowd becomes a silent witness to a very real, very ugly death. You pray for a steady hand. You pray for the clarity to not mistake this game for the real thing, to not let the muscle memory of war take over when the trumpets sound. The line between sport and slaughter is as thin as a bowstring, and you have seen men stumble across it, their eyes alight with a fire that has no place here. You pray for the man you will face, some young lord from the north, with a face you have not yet seen. Section 5. The Echo of the Melee. Your warhorse, now clean and draped in the colors of your house, trots with a steady, practiced gait. The road to the tournament grounds is lined with folk who cheer your name. They see the polished steel, the proud banner fluttering from your lance, the sheer spectacle of a knight prepared for the games. They hear the rhythmic clatter of hooves on the hard-packed earth and think of parades, of glory, of songs that will be sung in the great hall. But you hear something else. The rhythm is a trigger. You hear yourself before you see them. The sound is a stiff, metallic rhythm on the cobblestones, a clumsy music of iron plates grinding against each other. Each step is a deliberate, heavy affair, a reminder of the fortune you are wearing. You are not walking, you are carrying your net worth. You pass a tanner's boy, his eyes wide, not with admiration for a hero, but with the dawning, fearful comprehension of a man looking at an avalanche. He can smell the oil on your mail, the leather of your straps, the sheer, oppressive cost of you. They were not a monolithic block of suffering peasants. They were individuals, each waging a quiet, desperate war to preserve a flicker of warmth, of meaning, of hope for the next generation. When we study these ordinary, vanished people, we gain more than facts about famine and faith. We gain a profound sense of connection. We see that our own anxieties, our fears for our children, our struggle to find purpose in a chaotic world, our desire to leave something good behind, are not new. They are ancient echoes. Together, you begin the slow, agonizing process of pulling the steel mesh up and over your head. It scrapes past your ears, catching in your sweat-matted hair. For a moment, you are blind and deaf, suffocating in a cage of your own making. And then, it is off. The release of weight is so sudden, so absolute, that you stagger. There was a deep respect for the wisdom of elders, but this respect was often outweighed by the harsh reality of scarce resources. A mouth that could not be fed by its own hands was a liability. The poignant insight is the race against senility and irrelevance. In a pre-literate society, an old person's memory was the village's only history book. They were the keepers of the stories, the customs, the property boundaries. But as their minds faded, this living library would corrupt, its knowledge lost forever. There is a deep melancholy in this. This was not a rival religion, but a parallel track of belief, a set of tools for dealing with the immediate earthly problems that God, in His majesty, seemed too distant to handle. If your child had a fever, you might pray to St. Jude, but you would also tie a red thread around their wrist to trap the illness. If you were setting out on a journey, you would ask a priest for a blessing, but you would also avoid letting a black cat cross your path. Last winter, the flour was stretched with ground acorns and dried peas, and the bread was bitter and left a knot of hunger in your gut even after you'd eaten. Food was the central obsession of the medieval world, and its absence was the central fear. The modern palate would rebel at their diet. It was a monotonous rotation of pottage, a thick stew of grains and whatever vegetables were available, and the gritty dark bread. Meat was a rare luxury, reserved for feast days or poached from the Lord's forest at the risk of mutilation or death. Or was it the only medicine that truly worked, soothing? If our first pitch is complete, the world narrows to a thunderous corridor of splintering wood and straining leather. Your opponent's lance, a painted needle against the gray sky, drifts a fraction too high. You see it. Your body, a finely tuned instrument of violence, knows the precise cant of the shield, the exact twist of the hip that would unseat him in a spray of mud and glory. The crowd's roar is a physical pressure, a wave of expectation. They want blood, or at least its cousin, humiliation. But you know, with the cold certainty of a winter frost, that lances sometimes don't shatter. The wood is sometimes too green, the angle of impact too perfect, too terrible. You've seen them punch through an oaken shield as if it were parchment. You've seen them glance off a helmet, the tip finding the unprotected sliver of a throat. You've heard the sound a man makes when his lung is punctured by a splinter the size of a dagger. This was the medieval equivalent of motorsports, a festival of manufactured danger. It was thrilling, wildly popular, and staggeringly dangerous. The world shrinks to a sliver of light, a narrow promise of a world you are about to enter. For a moment, there is only the sound of your own breathing, loud and ragged in the steel echo chamber. You close your eyes inside this self-made darkness. You do not pray for victory. Victory is for glory-starved boys and the merchants who sell their banners. You do not pray for strength. Your arms, scarred and corded with muscle from 1,000 training drills and a dozen real skirmishes, have strength enough. No, your prayer is a quieter, more desperate thing. Ask yourself, when your word is both law and gospel, how do you stop yourself from becoming a tyrant? Or worse, a fool? But as the visor is latched, you feel the same cold dread, the same hollowing of the gut that used to precede a battle. Because even a fake war has real ghosts. Ask yourself, when the uniform is on and the world can no longer see your face, are you still you? Or do you become the purpose for which you were made? This is the moment, this quiet victory, that will never be recorded in any chronicle. It is too small, too personal. It is the real history of humanity. The timeless truth of the Middle Ages is not found in the grandeur of its wars, but in the intimacy of its survival. It's in the choice of a story, the knowledge of which herbs might soothe a fever, the shared glance between a husband and wife when the grain stores are low. This is the price of the performance, the toll paid in flesh for the glory witnessed by others. The true test, the moment of profound transformation, comes with the mail, the hauberk, a river of tens of thousands of interlinked iron rings, weighs more than a small child. It is not armor so much as a second, heavier skin. Leo positions himself behind you, his hands finding purchase at the hem. "Ready, my lord?" he murmurs, his voice the first to break the quiet. You nod, planting your feet. He is a repository of genealogies, of old slights and forgotten alliances. But no one is asking. The young are too busy with the work of the living. Reaching old age in the Middle Ages was a profound achievement, a testament to a strong constitution or sheer luck. But it was not a golden retirement. For the poor, to become too old or weak to work was to become a burden. Unless you had children willing and able to support you, your final years would be spent in beggary or relying on the grudging charity of the parish. She leaves a small bundle of herbs and a dish of milk at its roots, whispering a plea not to any saint, but to the old spirits of the wood. She is a devout Christian. She fears hell, but she fears a winter without a healthy cow more. Beneath the solid stone floor of the official church, a second, older faith persisted. It was a world of folk magic, pagan echoes, and practical superstition. Section 7. A mouthful of grit. The bread you tear is dark, heavy, and barley, because wheat is for the Lord. As you chew, you feel the familiar crunch of grit, tiny particles of stone ground from the millstone into the flour. It is the taste of every meal, This grit will slowly, over a lifetime, wear your teeth down to blunt, aching nubs. But today, it is good bread. It fills the belly. It was a desperate, elegant, and utterly wrong system, born from a need to impose order on the chaos of suffering. It was a world without anesthesia, where a surgeon was a barber with a strong stomach and a sharp knife. His work more akin to butchery. Ask yourself, could you endure the searing pain of a kidney stone being cut from your bladder while 4 men held you down? This constant proximity to pain shaped everything. It made life cheaper, death more familiar, and mercy a miracle. Was their faith so profound because their suffering was so great? This is history from the ground up, a journey into the heart of what it meant to simply be human in a world lit only by fire and faith. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin, and live the life they never got to finish. He has never seen a battlefield where the mud drinks men whole, where chivalry is the first casualty. To him, this is the entire world, a game of glory. You know better. Your squire passes you the lance. It is not a delicate thing. It is a 12-foot spear of solid ash, thick as your wrist, heavy and hungry in your gauntlet. It is tipped with a 3-pronged coronal, a courteous head designed to grip the shield and shatter the lance on impact, scoring points, not spilling guts. This is the point of the gentle joust, the plaisance. Section 8. A prayer for forgetting. You find a quiet corner behind the stables where the scent of hay and horse sweat is thick enough to taste. The distant roar of the crowd is a dull beast, muffled by stone walls. You are a man of iron and bone, a creature built for the saddle. But here, in the sliver of shade before the pageantry begins, you are something else entirely, something smaller. You lift the great helm, its weight a familiar burden, and slide it over your head. The farmer looks up, just for a second, and in his eyes you see not gratitude, but the raw, terrifying hope of a man who has placed his entire world into your hands. This was the unseen, unglamorous work of 1,000 medieval lords, not slaying dragons, but settling disputes over fences and livestock. We have since bureaucratized justice, wrapped it in paper and procedure. But the core function remains unchanged. A trusted authority must exist to keep the peace. For these people, that authority has your face. In here, you are a thing of iron and duty, an effigy of violence. You are a knight. This armor, this polished shell that costs more than the entire village of thatched huts beyond your stone walls, is not a symbol of glory. It is the heaviest secret you own. It is the shell you built to protect your body that now imprisons your soul. You are preparing for a tournament, a grand festival of contrived combat meant to entertain the very lords who would send you to a real war without a second thought. Ask yourself, in a world defined by its violence, what is the truer form of courage? To swing the axe, or to teach your child why it should remain by the hearth? Section 17. Wind down, reflective close. The fire settles into a bed of glowing coals. The story is over. Your son's breathing has deepened, his battle with sleep finally lost. He dreams, perhaps, of clever foxes, not broken men. You sit there in the warm silence, a guardian between your sleeping children and the vast indifferent darkness of the medieval night. He moves to your arms, unstrapping the vambraces, the counters at your elbows, the heavy pauldrons that have been digging into your shoulders since dawn. With each piece removed, a patch of your skin is returned to the world, tingling as the cool night air touches it for the first time in hours. The bruises are already blooming, dark purple flowers of violence against your pale skin. One on your ribs, where your opponent's lance struck with the force of a falling tree. Another on your thigh, a deep ache that promises a week of limping. It is Section 15, The Fading Light. An old man sits by the fire, his hands, gnarled as oak roots, resting on his knees. His eyes, clouded with cataracts, see the room in milky blurs. He has outlived 2 wives, 4 of his 7 children, and a king. His world has shrunk to this chair, this fire, this small circle of warmth. He is a library of lost knowledge. He remembers the great famine of his youth, the taste of bread made from bark. He remembers a time before the new stone bridge was built. Do you find your strength in mastering the small kingdom you are given? Or do you quietly mourn the larger world you are forbidden to enter? Another heading. Section 11, The Whispers at the Crossroads. The cow is sick. The milk is thin and sour. The village priest has blessed it, sprinkling it with holy water, but the animal is still failing. That night, under a sliver of moon, the farmer's wife takes matters into her own hands. She walks to the oldest oak tree at the edge of the village, a place her grandmother called sacred. A farmer might leave a small portion of the last sheaf in the field as an offering to the corn spirit, a pagan echo to ensure next year's fertility. It was a contradiction they lived with easily. You pray to God in the church, and you leave an offering for the spirit in the field. You cover all your bases. Was it a lack of faith? Or the ultimate act of it, an admission that the forces governing life and death were too vast and mysterious for any single system to contain? The insight here is not that they were weak, but that their definition of health was simply the absence of incapacitating agony. They understood the body not through science, but through the theory of humors, a universe of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile warring within them. A fever was not a symptom of infection, but an excess of hot, dry yellow bile. Melancholy was not depression, but a flood of cold, damp, black bile. Their cures were therefore acts of rebalancing, bleeding a man to reduce his hot blood, or feeding him leeks to counteract his cold humors. We will walk in the footsteps of people who left no monuments, whose names are lost to time, but whose struggles, beliefs, and sheer stubborn will to survive built the world we now stand in. We will try to understand not just what they did, but why. How a fear of the dark shaped their rituals, how the turn of the seasons was their only true king, and how a single bad harvest could unravel a generation. It sounds like a stranger's. You are not a farmer praying for rain. You are not a monk praying for salvation. You are a prayer for violence, encased in 80 pounds of articulated plate steel. Across the field, your opponent is a vision of arrogant youth. He is a young, proud knight from the north. His shield, freshly painted, with a snarling black wolf against a field of blood red. He sits his warhorse with an easy grace that irritates you, a confidence born from wealth and inexperience. Ask yourself, when your survival depends on the perception of others, is there any room left for authenticity? Or does the mask become the face? Today, we may not charge at each other with lances for a lady's scarf, but we still perform. We post our successes, curate our family photos, and present a carefully constructed version of our lives, acutely aware that our triumphs and failures reflect upon those we love. The game has changed, but the stakes, reputation, status, and the quiet fear of shared embarrassment feel hauntingly familiar. Your reputation for fairness is a far more critical asset than your skill with a lance, for it is this reputation that keeps the rod of chaos from setting into the roots of your land. An unjust ruling breeds a bitterness that can poison a field more surely than any blight. It is a slow plague of resentment that can fester for a generation. You lean down, your voice muffled and strange through your helm, a hollow sound from a metal god. You promise to hear his case in the hall upon your return. The sounds of the castle, the clatter in the kitchens, the barking of dogs in the bailey, the boys' cheerful humming are all snuffed out, replaced by a dull, distant echo. The only sound left is the booming symphony of your own breathing. Every gasp is an intimate thunder, a blacksmith's bellows roaring in the hollow of your skull. In here, you are no longer Kalen, the man who worries about the coming harvest, who knows the names of his tenants' children, who remembers his wife's scent on the pillow beside him. This is your quiet rebellion. In a world that carves its history with the sword, you are planting a different seed in the fertile soil of your children's minds. It is a small act, a single story, against 1,000 roaring epics of bloodshed. It is a parent's desperate prayer, whispered into the embers, that your children will learn to value the wisdom of the fox over the fury of the wolf. Leo, your squire, moves with the silent, practiced grace of a boy who has performed this ritual 1,000 times. He is barely a man himself, his face still holding the soft lines of youth, but his hands are steady and sure. He doesn't speak. The silence is part of the ceremony. He kneels, his movements precise, unlacing the steel greaves from your shins. Each buckle undone is a small sigh of relief. The plates fall to the rush-strewn floor with a heavy, final clatter, the sound of a shell being discarded. We are taught to admire the grand, dramatic gesture, the charge at Agincourt, the building of a great cathedral. But perhaps the most profound human work is often the least dramatic. The simple act of ensuring a roof doesn't leak. The hard decision of how to distribute grain in a famine. The patient work of maintaining order and justice in a small, forgotten corner of the world. Ask yourself, what is a greater fortress? One of stone walls designed to keep enemies out, or one of shared trust and responsibility designed to hold a community together? A household with an incompetent or lazy wife would quickly fall into ruin, no matter how hard the husband worked the fields. This creates a paradox. A woman could be legally beaten by her husband, could not own property independently, and had no public voice, yet the entire domestic economy rested on her shoulders. Was this a form of empowerment, or simply a heavier set of chains? They navigated a world that simultaneously deemed them inferior and utterly essential. Ask yourself, how do you build a sense of self in a world that tells you you are secondary? Their metaphors were born from the soil. A good man was solid as an oak. A traitor was a snake in the grass. The rhythms of the land were the rhythms of their lives, their bodies, their faith. The resurrection of Christ was mirrored in the rebirth of the grain each spring, a powerful, tangible metaphor that reinforced belief in a way no sermon could. This absolute dependence on the land created a deep, superstitious respect for it. They believed in spirits of the field and forest, older than their Christian God. This is the first and most fundamental truth of medieval life. The body is a cage of pain, a fragile vessel under constant assault. For us, sickness is an interruption. For them, a state of being. The world is a litany of physical miseries we have forgotten. The constant, low-grade infections from cuts and scrapes. The worms that bloat the bellies of children. The agony of a broken bone setting crookedly, leaving you lame for life. The cataracts that slowly steal the light, leaving an old man to sit by a fire he can only feel. This is not a story of kings in gilded halls or knights whose deeds are sung in ballads. This is a quieter history, a sleepier history. It is a story felt in the bones, lived in the mud and the dark. It's about the gnawing hunger of a lean winter, the terror of a difficult childbirth, and the strange comfort of a superstition that gives a name to the shadows. The sound of the world is muffled, as if you're at the bottom of a well. Your own breathing is a roaring tide in your ears, trapped inside the steel shell of your great helm. Through the narrow eye slit, the world is a sliver of bright green grass, a blur of colorful pavilions, and the expectant faces of 1,000 souls who have paid to watch a man risk everything for their entertainment. The herald's voice cuts through the din, a boom of practiced authority that feels both distant and intimate. He calls your name. It was a social mechanism, a way to structure alliances and bleed off the violent ambitions of landless knights. It was a game of reputation management, played with poems instead of daggers, with jousts instead of skirmishes. A knight pledging himself to a powerful lord's wife wasn't a romantic fool. He was signaling his loyalty to that lord's power, folding himself neatly into the hierarchy. It was a way to navigate a world teeming with masculine pride without constant bloodshed. It was a performance, a beautiful and necessary lie. You are a walking, breathing embodiment of the state's authority, and it has followed you to the very threshold of your stables. Your word can settle this dispute, return the value of the pig, and restore a fragile peace. Or it can end one of these men permanently. The thought is not a comfort, it is a weight, heavier than your chainmail. This is the hidden truth of your power. It isn't forged in the grand clash of armies, but in these 1,000 tiny judgments. The boy fusses with the leather straps, his fingers nimble and eager. He sees a hero in the making. You see a cage being locked, methodically from the outside. Finally, the great helm. Thomas holds it up for a moment, its polished surface reflecting a distorted version of his own face, wide-eyed and full of dreams. Then he lowers it over your head, and the world vanishes. Your vision is reduced to 2 narrow slits, a letterbox of grudging, indifferent light. He complimented the wolf's cunning, then laid a clever trap of logic, a puzzle of words about a hidden flock of sheep that only the smartest hunter could find. The wolf, blinded by his pride, fell for the trick, ending up trapped in a ravine, outsmarted not by muscle, but by wit. As you finish, you look down at your son. The firelight has softened his features. "Do you see, my boy?" you murmur, stroking his hair. The wolf's teeth were sharp, but the fox's mind was sharper. A strong mind is a blade that never dulls. The only light comes from a single tallow candle, its flame sputtering as if in a constant struggle for breath, casting long, dancing shadows that make the familiar tapestries seem alive with whispering figures. This is your private world, a cell of stone and timber carved out of the great, cold fortress. Outside, you are Sir Renaud, a name spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear, a symbol forged in steel and victory. But here, in the flickering dark, you are just a man, and you are exhausted. This is the quiet, surprising truth of the knightly class. For many, the sword was a symbol, but the ledger and the land were the reality. They were the middle managers of the feudal system, caught between the demands of the great lords above them and the needs of the peasants below. Their work was the essential, grinding, and deeply human task of keeping things going. It was a life of ceaseless, low-grade anxiety, a constant calculation of risk and resource. This life poses a profound question about the nature of power and legacy. Yet here lies the surprising insight. Within these rigid constraints, women wielded a different, quieter kind of power. While the man was the public head of the household, the woman was its private manager. She was the alewife brewing the family's drink, the baker, the weaver, the healer. She managed the food stores, a critical role that determined the family's survival through winter. In the marketplace, women were a common sight, selling eggs, cheese, and spun thread. This hearth power was unofficial and often invisible to the male-dominated record, but it was essential. Spring was a time of desperate hope, planting the last of the seed grain and praying for rain. Summer was a long, anxious wait, watching the skies for drought or blight. Autumn was a frenzy of labor, and winter was the great reckoning, when you discovered if your work had been enough. The profound insight here is how the natural world was woven into their very souls. Their sense of time was different. They didn't think in hours and minutes, but in the position of the sun, the liturgical hours of the church, and the progress of the crops. The tooth, a blackened stump, has been a dull ache for a month, a sullen grumble for a week, and is now a tyrant holding your entire being hostage. There is no remedy beyond a prayer to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of toothache, or the village wise woman, whose poultice of henbane and pig dung brought on fever in your neighbor last spring. You choose the prayer. It costs nothing, and the risk is only to your soul. Chapter 1. Introduction. The air in the pre-dawn is thin and smells of damp wool, wood smoke, and a faint, metallic tang of fear. A single church bell begins to toll, not for prayer, but for the passing of a soul, another fever taken in the night. It is a sound so common it barely registers, a quiet rhythm beneath the surface of your life. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. We now have names for this pain. Trauma, post-traumatic stress. But naming the ghost doesn't stop it from walking the halls of the mind. Ask yourself, when your own memory becomes the enemy, and your armor protects you from every blade but the one forged in your mind, who do you pray to for salvation? The battle is over, but the war inside you has just begun. But a defeat, a splintered lance, a fall into the mud, that is not your embarrassment alone. It is a stain you will both wear, a quiet shame that will follow you from the field and into the halls, a whispered doubt about your competence, your wealth, your very manhood. It is a shared season of blight. We mistake these rituals for pure love, but they were a currency of their own, as cold and practical as silver. The phenomenon of courtly love, that pageant of chaste devotion to an unattainable lady, was almost never about consummation. He names his neighbor, Osbert, and speaks of a sudden suspicious feast, the smell of roasting pork hanging heavy over a hovel that has known only turnips for a month. There are no police precincts. There are no detectives to dust for prints or interview witnesses in sterile rooms. There is only the mud, the farmer's trembling hands, and you, encased in steel. You are the law. You are not a king, not a distant power spoken of in whispers. He hums a tune he heard from a traveling minstrel, a song of valiant deeds and fair maidens. The irony is a bitter communion wafer on your tongue. The rest of the cage is assembled piece by piece. The boiled leather cuisses, hard and unyielding, are strapped to your thighs. You remember the last time you wore them in earnest. The scream of a horse, the wet, percussive sound of a mace finding its home. The articulated polans click into place over your knees. Joints of steel mimicking your own. The rigid greaves encase your shins. The bear could crush him. The boar could gore him. And the wolf was a gray shadow of hunger and teeth. You describe how the wolf, arrogant in his power, trapped the fox, boasting that strength was the only law of the woods. Your son leans in, his fascination with clashing steel forgotten, replaced by a new tension. You tell him how the fox did not try to fight. Instead, he spoke to the wolf. He used his mind. How a fear of the dark could shape a village's laws, or how the promise of heaven could make the hell of their reality just bearable enough. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. The air in the chamber is thick with the day's work. It smells of horse sweat, damp leather, and the metallic tang of your own blood, dried in the creases of your gambeson. You mediate disputes over stray pigs. You scrutinize the accounts of the reeve. You listen to pleas from tenants whose children are sick with fever. Your most fearsome enemy is not a French cavalier, but the blight that threatens the barley fields. Your greatest victory is not a captured banner, but a winter with no one lost to hunger. Their legacy is not in the annals of war, but in the enduring fields and villages they managed. The medieval world was built on a foundation of profound, biblically sanctioned inequality. Woman, formed from Adam's second rib, was considered intellectually, physically, and morally inferior to man. Theologians and scholars wrote lengthy treatises on her inherent weakness, her susceptibility to temptation. The ghost of Eve was long, and her talkative nature. Her purpose was simple and threefold: to labor, to obey, and to bear children, preferably sons. Her world was the domestic sphere, the hearth, the garden, the nursery. To step outside, it was to invite scorn and suspicion. This is the harvest, the most sacred and terrifying time of the year. It is a frantic race against the turning of the season, a battle waged not with swords, but with sickles. To fail is to starve. There is no other option. The medieval world was ruled by a green tyrant, the agricultural calendar. The lives of 90% of the population were dictated not by kings or popes, but by the implacable cycle of planting, growing, and reaping. The seasons were not just a backdrop. They were the engine of existence. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. Section 2. The Tyranny of the Body. You wake in darkness, not because you are ready, but because the pain in your jaw has become a roaring fire that no sleep can quench. Ask yourself, in a life defined by a rigid chain of command, God above the king above the Lord above you, what is the value of a choice that no one else will ever see? Is it faith that guides such a decision, or a desperate attempt to prove you are more than just a piece in someone else's game? In an age without the language of psychology, these reactions are not symptoms, they are signs. To the priest, they are evidence of a spirit weakened by sin, an open door for demonic influence. To your fellow knights, they are the first rot of cowardice, a private shame to be hidden at all costs. To you, they are a baffling betrayal by your own body. The unseen wounds, the ones that do not bleed, are the most terrifying of all because they have no earthly explanation. They are a private haunting, an internal exile within your own mind. It is a matter of social arithmetic, a public performance of a private contract. When you ride against your opponent, you are not fighting for her love. You already have that, a quiet and settled thing like land after the harvest. You are fighting to affirm her status. Your victory today is a declaration to all who watch that her husband is strong, that her household is secure, that her choice in you was a wise one. A victory means she can hold her head high among the other wives. You know his face, but not his name. He falls to his knees before your horse, bowing so low his forehead nearly scrapes the mud, his posture a prayer of supplication. He doesn't look at you, but at the ground, as if your station is too bright to behold. He speaks of a stolen pig. His voice is thin, whipped away by the wind, but the words are ancient and sharp with grievance. Then comes the male hauberk. It is not lifted, but poured over you. A river of 40,000 interlocking iron rings slithers over your shoulders, with a sighing metallic crash that seems to settle directly into your bones. It weighs as much as a small child, a constant, crushing reminder of your duty. You feel your shoulders slump, your breath catch. Each ring is a sin, a memory, a name you try to forget. Thomas, oblivious, begins lacing the sides, his touch light, his movements precise. So you pull him closer, the smell of wood smoke in his hair. A tournament, you say, your voice low and thoughtful. That is a loud, brutish story. I have a better one, a quieter one. You begin to speak not of men, but of animals, the way old stories do when the truth is too sharp for a child's ears. There was once a wise old fox, you start, whose fur was the color of autumn leaves. He was not the strongest in the forest. Their world was small, often no larger than the distance a man could walk in a day, but their humanity was as vast and deep as our own. If you love immersive real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. We will walk through their days and sit by their fires. We will try to understand not just what they did, but why. You are a knight, but your true domain is not the battlefield. It is this small, fragile ecosystem of people and land entrusted to your care. Your real castle is not made of stone, but of responsibilities. History focuses on the great battles and the grand kings, but the medieval world was held together by thousands of men like you. Minor lords, provincial knights, whose daily struggle was one of stewardship, agriculture, and local justice. Your title, sir, is a warrior's title. Yet your days are spent as an administrator. Their labor in the fields is considered more valuable. their bodies requiring more fuel. When the men are done, she and her mother will eat what is left. Her future is as fixed as the North Star. She will be married off, not for love, but for an alliance of land or labor. Her dowry, a cow, a few pots, a patch of land, is her entire worth. She will pass from the authority of her father to the authority of her husband. Her own desires are a currency she does not possess. Or would you bend just enough to fit the mold, finding your freedom not in grand gestures of rebellion, but in the small, stolen moments of a life already decided for you? Section 6. The Green Tyrant. The sun hangs low over the western fields, painting the sky in shades of rust and blood. You are bent double, your back a single, screaming nerve. For weeks, this has been your world, the scratch of stubble against your ankles, the rhythmic swing of the scythe, the sweat that stings your eyes. Not through its coronations, but through its childbirths. We will walk through a world lit by tallow candles and ruled by the seasons. A world where faith was as real as the mud on your boots, and fear was the air you breathed. We'll explore the profound, often brutal, logic behind their superstitions, and the quiet dignity in their struggle for survival. This is history felt in the bones, the ache of a long day's labor, the gnawing dread of sickness, the small, fierce joy of a child's survival. This is the quiet irony of the chivalric code. It asks for a performance of gentility from the most violent men in society. It is a beautiful, fragile mask worn to conceal the terrifying reality of what they are capable of. For Sir Renaud, the man you just spared, this honor may be a garment he puts on for the tournament and casts off for the battlefield. But for you, the choice was real. You lost the point, but you won the battle that mattered to you. His look is not of understanding. It is of a deep, worried confusion, the kind a boy gives a prized hound that has suddenly turned feral. You wave it off with a gesture you pray looks casual. But the echo of the sound remains. It wasn't the sound of dropped metal. It was the sound of Sir Alaric's shield shattering an inch from your face. The sound that came just before the Danish axe cleaved his helmet and his life in two. It was the prelude to death, a bell that tolls only once. Each knight announces his devotion, tying a lady's favor to his lance or helm. A sleeve, a glove, a ribbon embroidered with a personal crest. Your own token is a simple band of dark green cloth, tied just below the steel point of your lance. It is from your wife. There are no pearls sewn into it, no thread of gold. It is plain, sturdy, and familiar, much like the woman who gave it to you. This is not the fever dream of romance you've heard in the songs of the troubadours. For you, this is not a matter of the heart. Section 4. A world without police. The warhorse stamps a hoof against the packed earth of the bailey, its breath a white plume in the damp air. The world is a cacophony of iron and leather, as your squire makes a final adjustment to your saddle. You are already a creature of metal, your movements stiff, your vision narrowed to a slit. Before you can give the signal to ride out, a shape detaches itself from the morning mist, a man moving with the frantic, stumbling gait of the desperate. He is one of yours, a tenant farmer. He has fire in his eyes and none in his memory. He sees the making of a legend, the glorious ritual before the festival. You see the slow, methodical construction of a cage around your soul. He starts with the padded arming doublet, the foundation of your confinement. It is stained with the ghosts of old sweat and smells faintly of rust, damp wool, and the lingering fear you thought you'd washed away. Thomas pulls it tight, his brow furrowed in concentration. For him, this is an honor, a sacred proximity to power. For you, it feels like a shroud. The boy, barely a man, who saw only the glory in the polished steel, the bright pennants snapping in the wind. He did not see the splintered bone, the horse's scream, the gurgling sound a man makes when a blade finds the soft spot beneath his jaw. He saw a song, you saw a butcher's bill. That boy's ghost still follows you on cold nights, and you cannot, you will not, feed that same hunger for glorified violence to your own son. It is a poison sweetened with honey, a history of survival, not conquest. It is a story told in the rhythm of the seasons, in the weight of a bucket of water, in the fear of a bad harvest, and in the superstitions that bloom like nightshade in the dark corners of the mind. They were not simple, these people. They were complex, frightened, and hopeful beings, trapped in a world governed by forces they could not comprehend. God, disease, the turning of the year, the will of a lord. Section 14, a different kind of castle. That evening, while others feast and boast in the great hall, you walk the battlements of your own small keep. The sound of their laughter is distant, like a story from another man's life. You are not thinking of war, but of the leaking roof on the granary, a dark, damp patch that threatens a quarter of the rye harvest. You are thinking of the coming winter, and whether the stores will be enough to see your people through the lean months. This created a simmering tension, a quiet rivalry between the old world of the manor and the new world of the market. Ask yourself, would you trade the open sky of the fields for the crowded walls of the town? Would you exchange the certainty of servitude for the chance of freedom, even if that freedom was bound by a new set of rules you had no say in making? Ask. Section 10, the second rib. A girl watches her brothers eat first. It is the natural order of things. Play was a luxury, a brief interlude in a life of labor that began almost from the cradle. This upbringing created a different kind of person. It forged a resilience we can scarcely imagine, but it also foreclosed the possibility of choice. You did not discover yourself. You became what your father was, what your mother was. Your life was a furrow plowed for you before you were born. Ask yourself, would you survive in a world without choice, where your path was set from the moment of your birth? Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This isn't a story of kings in gilded halls or knights in shining armor charging into legend. This is sleepy history. We are here for the stories that slipped through the cracks of the Grand Chronicles. We are here for the lives lived in the shadow of the castle, in the quiet terror of a bad harvest, in the desperate hope of a prayer whispered to a wooden saint. We are here to understand the world, not through its wars, but through its winters. We still confuse restraint with weakness, yet it is often the most difficult and powerful choice of all. It is the choice of the farmer who, after a decade of back-breaking work, finally buys his freedom from his lord, instead of taking the shorter, bloodier path of rebellion. It is the choice of the midwife who uses her knowledge to save a mother, when a single, accidental mistake could remove a rival. Power isn't always the swing of the axe. Sometimes, it is the deliberate stillness of the hand that holds it. You flinch, a violent, full-body recoil that sends a jolt of pain through your old shoulder wound. Your hand, wrapped in a gauntlet worn smooth by years of use, flies to the pommel of your sword, your knuckles white against the leather. Your heart is no longer beating. It is a wild bird trapped in the cage of your ribs, battering itself against the bone. Your breath catches, a ragged, stolen thing. Leo, your squire, walking a pace behind, sees the tremor in your hand. He sees the sudden, stark pallor of your face through the helm's visor. Chapter 7. The Currency of a Lady's Favor. The air is thick with the smell of trampled grass, horse sweat, and roasting meat. From the edge of the tournament field, the pavilions of the great lords bloom in a riot of color. Blood red, royal blue, and gold that shimmers like a saint's halo in the hazy afternoon sun. You shift your weight in the saddle, the steel plates of your armor groaning like a ship's hull in a storm. High in the covered stands, a constellation of ladies watches, their silken sleeves fluttering in the breeze like captured birds. Is it when the teacher speaks the words, or when life carves them into your own flesh? Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. Okay, Chapter 1. A Cage of Iron and Memory. Your day begins not with the sun, but with the cold, dead weight of your profession. You are Sir Calin, and you are being erased. Your squire, a boy of 15 named Thomas, moves around you with a practiced reverence. But your son, his eyes wide and mirroring the fire's flicker, is fiercely awake. He has the terrible, restless energy of a sapling reaching for the sun. "A story, father," he whispers, his voice full of the day's last strength. "Tell of the tournament, of Sir Guy and the crash of the lances." You look at his face, so open and eager, and a cold memory surfaces. It's the same look you saw in your squire's eyes years ago. This isn't a story of kings crowned in gold or battles that rewrite the maps of men. That is the skin of history, the loud, bright armor it wears for posterity. We are here for the body beneath it, for the quiet, aching truth of a life lived one sunrise at a time. We are here for the calloused hands of the woman pulling flax, for the gnawing hunger of the peasant in a lean winter, for the whispered prayer of a father watching his child's fever climb. This is history, with the dirt still under its fingernails. A king's victory on a foreign field could mean a decade of hardship for a village that shared his banner, but not his spoils. Ask yourself this question of brutal irony. Is it better for your men to die in battle, or to return home, broken and unable to work, a living burden on a community already stretched to its breaking point? For a medieval village, there was no good answer. To become a master craftsman was a long, arduous journey. Years as an unpaid apprentice, more years as a low-wage journeyman, and finally, the creation of a masterpiece to be judged by the guild masters, a process that could be easily manipulated to keep out rivals. This system created a new kind of social hierarchy, one based on skill and wealth rather than land and birth. It was a world of burgeoning capitalism clashing with rigid tradition. A wealthy wool merchant might have more coin than a minor knight, but he could never have his status. A surprising insight is found in their art and language. In medieval paintings, children are often depicted as miniature adults, with adult proportions and somber expressions. This wasn't a lack of artistic skill. It reflected their worldview. The cuteness we cherish in children was not a valued commodity. Instead, their worth was in their utility and their potential to contribute to the family's survival. They were apprentices in the craft of living. A girl learned to spin wool at age 5. A boy learn to guide a plow, or mend a fence. The first sound is a bell. Not a triumphant peal from a cathedral, but a single, dull clang from the village church, cutting through the pre-dawn mist. It isn't a call to prayer, it's a warning. The frost has come hard and early, a thief in the night, and the last of the harvest is in peril. In the dark of your hut, you pull a rough wool tunic over your head, the smell of wood smoke, sweat, and damp earth clinging to the fibers. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. It grants no purse, earns no applause, and will never be sung by a bard. It is a victory of the spirit, invisible to all but two men. True strength is so often invisible. It is the choice not made, the blow not struck, the cruel word swallowed like a stone. In a culture that celebrated overwhelming force, where a king's legitimacy was written in the blood of his enemies, and a man's worth was measured by the land he could hold, the quiet act of mercy was a radical, often misunderstood statement. For the first time in a season, there is no war banner on the horizon. There is only this, the clumsy, vibrant pulse of life in a town rebuilding itself after a long siege. Suddenly, from the blacksmith's forge to your left, a thunderclap of pure iron. A smith's apprentice, no older than your own squire, loses his grip on a sheet of hammered steel. It hits the cobblestones with a deafening, metallic clang. Inside your great helm, the sound is not merely loud. It is explosive. It is a physical blow. It is the attempt to make the unthinkable seem honorable, to draw a tidy line between slaughter and righteousness. Ask yourself, when the law is written by the sword, is there any real difference between a knight and a brigand, other than the quality of his banner? How could he? For him, the world is still a simple manuscript, illuminated in bold colors of good and evil, glory and shame. He has not yet learned that real life is lived in the margins, in the smudges and corrections, where a man's survival depends not on the strength of his arm, but on the careful calculus of whom not to kill. It is a lesson he will have to learn for himself, likely the hard way. Ask yourself, when does a lesson truly take root? We'll learn how the tolling of a church bell could be both a comfort and a terror, how the changing of a season was a judgment from God, and how the simplest of human needs, for warmth, for food, for meaning in a world of casual cruelty, forged the rituals and beliefs that built our world from the mud up. This is Sleepy History. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Section 16. A Story by the Fire. The day's labor is done. The endless cycle of mending and tending, of hauling and hoping, has settled with the sun. Now, there is only the hearth. Its light pushes back the hungry darkness that presses against the wattle and daub walls, a small, defiant star in your own private night. The flames paint dancing saints and devils on the ceiling. Your daughter is already half lost to dreams, her head a warm weight against your side, her breathing as soft and even as summer rain. The first sound is the bell, a cold iron tongue striking the hour of matins. It travels through the pre-dawn gloom not as a call to prayer, but as a warning. Something is ending, something is beginning. The air, thin and sharp as a needle, carries the scent of damp wool and dying embers. A dog barks once, a jagged tear in the fabric of the silence. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. It was the slow, grinding poverty that descended on a village that had lost its strongest hands. The annals of kings speak of victory and defeat. The unwritten annals of the village speak only of survival and loss. The return of the soldiers was often as disruptive as their departure. Men came back maimed, unable to work the fields. They came back brutalized, carrying the trauma of what they had seen and done. They brought back strange diseases that swept through the vulnerable community. The surprising insight is that the guild was both a protector and a prison. For its members, it offered a cradle-to-grave safety net. The guild would support a craftsman's widow, educate his children, and ensure he had a proper burial. It guaranteed a fair price for his work and protected him from outside competition. But for an outsider, the guild was an impenetrable wall. In the Middle Ages, a child was seen as an incomplete adult. They were loved, yes, but that love was tempered by brutal practicality. With mortality rates so high, an emotional investment in a very young child was a hedge against heartbreak. Children were often given the same name as a deceased sibling, a chillingly practical form of replacement. They were not sheltered from the realities of life. They saw death. They saw birth. They understood hunger, and they were put to work as soon as they could walk and follow a simple command. The echo of the church bell is in our clocks, measuring out our days. The fear of a failed harvest is in our economic forecasts. The ghost of their world is a foundation under our own, unseen but essential. They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted. But as you pass him, wrenching your horse back under control, you see it. Through the narrow slit of his own helm, you see the brief, startled recognition in his eyes. He is a butcher, but he is no fool. He knew the opening was there. He felt his own vulnerability, the cold whisper of the void you could have sent him into. He knew what you could have done, and he knows that you chose not to. In that silent, fleeting moment, a different kind of victory is won. The street is a river of noise and mud, and you are a stone in its current. People part around you, their eyes a mixture of awe and fear. The weight of your hauberk is a familiar comfort, a second skin of steel rings that has saved your life more times than you can count. The sun warms the iron on your shoulders. Somewhere, a merchant is shouting the price of Flemish cloth, and the smell of roasting pig grease mingles with the ever-present scent of human waste and damp earth. It was a story knights told themselves, a performance for God and for each other, to give the brutal business of power a noble sheen. The paradox sits in your gut, heavy as undigested meat. How do you create a system of honor for a profession built on violence? It is an ancient, impossible alchemy, trying to turn blood into wine. We still try. We give it new names, rules of engagement, just war theory, but it is the same ghost in a different suit of armor. Yet in our secret hearts, we still celebrate the knockout punch, the final decisive blow. You are trying to teach the boy that the greatest strength is not in the violence of the strike, but in the mercy of its restraint. You are trying to explain that the man you face today across the tillyard is your cousin by marriage, the son of a man you owe a debt to. Killing him would not be a victory. It would be a plague on your house, a political and financial ruin that no broken lance could ever mend. He doesn't understand. It's the story of survival, written not in ink, but in the calloused hands of a peasant, the whispered prayer of a mother, and the weary sigh of a soldier. Here, history is not a grand tapestry viewed from a distance. It is a single, coarse thread felt between your fingers. We'll explore the world through their eyes, feel the gnawing hunger that shaped their morality, and understand the deep, binding power of a superstition that could mean the difference between life and death. We will walk in their footsteps, feel the rough-spun cloth on our skin, and ask the questions they were too afraid to ask aloud. Was it piety that built the great churches, or was it a frantic attempt to bargain with the plague? When a mother buried her third child, what did she truly believe about the saints who did not answer? Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. The echo of a superstition in our saying "bless you" after a sneeze. The ghost of the harvest cycle in our academic and fiscal years. The deep, instinctual comfort of a shared ritual. The quiet fear of the unknown that still lurks in the dark. They are the unseen architects of our world, the ancestors of our anxieties and our hopes. They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted. It was the sudden violence of a passing mercenary company, taking what they wanted and leaving ruin in their wake. The devastating insight is that the greatest cost of war was paid by those who never held a weapon. The true battle was fought after the soldiers left. It was the battle of a wife trying to bring in the harvest with only her young children to help. It was the battle against starvation when the seed grain had been taken for the war effort. Life in a medieval town offered a tantalizing promise: freedom. An escaped serf who could live within the town walls for a year and a day was legally free from his lord. This made towns magnets for the ambitious and the desperate. But this freedom was not absolute. It was a trade. The tyranny of the Lord for the tyranny of the guild. Every skilled trade, from weaving to goldsmithing to carpentry, was controlled by a guild, a powerful organization that set prices, dictated quality standards, and determined who was allowed to practice the craft. He is not playing, he is working. His job is to keep the pigs from wandering into the precious crop fields. He has no shoes. His tunic is a hand-me-down from a brother who died of the sweating sickness 2 summers ago. No one asks him if he is happy. No one considers his potential. He is simply another small body to be fed, a future pair of hands for the harvest, provided he survives the gauntlet of childhood. The very concept of childhood as a protected, innocent stage of life is a modern invention. They were shaping their world with the only tools they had: ritual, community, and an intimate understanding of their immediate environment. Their superstitions were not madness, they were a form of control, a way to impose order on a universe that was capricious and terrifying. Their rigid social structures were not just oppressive, they were a bulwark against the chaos that was always scratching at the door. And what remains of them in us? More than we think. It is in our inherited anxieties, our unspoken social codes, our desire for certainty in an uncertain world. It is a prayer offered to the God of honor, a gamble that this performance of virtue matters more than the reality of victory. The impact is a small apocalypse. Your lance, a carefully shaped length of ash, explodes into 1,000 splinters, a firework of failed intention. His lance strikes your shield with a deafening percussive boom that vibrates through your bones and rattles your teeth. The sound is a bell tolling for your loss. The point is his. The crowd groans. A single beast of disappointment. You have lost the game. To the person on the ground, living in the shadow of the castle wall, the view is always different. Ask yourself, when a man holds the power of life and death over you, is it his virtue you pray for, or simply his inattention? But the weak, it seems, were only those of noble blood. The helpless were only ladies of a certain station, and mercy was a currency spent only on those who could repay it. Chivalry was never a code of conduct. It was a beautiful, soaring hymn sung to drown out the screams of the dying. It was a moral leash for a pack of very dangerous dogs, a leash that was always slipped when it became inconvenient for the master holding it. Here lies the chasm, wide as a besieged moat, between the ideal and the reality of what it means to be a knight. Chivalry is not a set of battlefield commands. It is a cage built for wolves. It is a beautiful, desperate attempt to civilize a class of men trained from boyhood for maximum, intimate destruction. The code is a litany of rules for a deadly game, a prayer whispered to keep the beast of your own making leashed. We teach our own children about sportsmanship and fair play, about helping an opponent up. The only clock you know is the ache in your back and the slow creep of shadows across the dirt floor. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This is not a story of kings and crowns, of battles won by names you know. This is a story of the quiet, the forgotten, the vast majority who lived and died without ever leaving a record.